From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 2 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
If, for such a small word, it packs a wallop. If I live to 100, if Social Security isn't enough, if my heart gets broken, if she says yes. We believe if should never hold you back. If should be managed with a plan that builds on what you already have. Together, we can create a personal safety net, a launching pad for all those brilliant ifs in the middle of life. You can call on our expertise and get guarantees for the if in life. After all, we're MetLife.
Issue 1, Iran, beware.
We don't take any options off the table in terms of how we operate with Iran. The United States will join with its partners and allies in making sure that they pay a price.
President Obama announced this week that an elite military unit of Iran's armed forces was plotting to assassinate Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States, where he lives. The U.S. Department of Justice says flat out that Iran's military unit, known as the Quds Force, planned to hire a Mexican drug cartel to kill the Saudi ambassador to the United States at a D.C. restaurant. But federal authorities foiled the plan because one of the two plotters, Mansour Ababsiar, worked with an informant of the U.S. government. Ababsiar, who has dual U.S.-Iranian citizenship, is now under arrest at a federal prison in New York. The Justice Department says that Ababsiar had no concerns about how many U.S. lives would be lost if this plot were to be carried out.
When the confidential source noted that there could be 100 or 150 people in a fictional restaurant where the requested bombing would take place, including possibly members of the United States Congress, the lead defendant said no problem.
The other alleged plotter is Gholam Shakuri, a member of the Iranian Quds Force. Shakuri is believed to be in Iran. U.S. Attorney General Holder was asked on Tuesday whether the plot was sanctioned by any high-level member of the Iranian government, whether a mullah or Iranian president himself, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
We are not making that charge at this point.
But the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, believes that the highest levels of Iran's power structure were involved.
I have a high degree of confidence that there were the highest echelons of the Iranian government involved in this particular act.
Question, if this plot had succeeded, bombing and assassination in a D.C. restaurant, would it be an act of war? Pat Buchanan.
Well, it certainly would. It would be another Lockerbie right in Washington, D.C., John. But this whole thing has an aroma of fish about it. This fellow Mansour wasn't interested in politics or religion according to his buddies. He drank and smoked and chased gals. He's a used car salesman, and he's an obnoxious character to all his friends, etc. The guy he contacted in the Zetas just happened to turn out to be a DEA deep penetration agent. So I think there's something fishy about this. I do not for a second believe that the Ayatollah or the Quds Force or anyone at a high level would authorize this insanity, because the next day there would be 20 B-2 bombers over Tehran and Natanz. So I think, basically, John, that the neocons are gassing up the Enola Gay, but I don't think this thing justifies, as of now, any military action.
Well, that would be quite a condemnation of the Attorney General.
Well, John, there's too many holes in this. If someone says this looks like a bad plot from a novel.
Well, the principal guy, who you described in very unflattering terms, he was kind of a ne'er-do-well, and he couldn't seem to carry out his life right. He wouldn't be the kind of person that this elite force in Iran would normally pick. Plus, he was dealing with non-Muslims, which is not their MO. And Iran's been very good at carrying out targeted assassinations around the world, so they know how to do this. So I think it's appropriate to have skepticism, but the administration has a $100,000 wire transfer from the Quds Force in Iran to this fellow, and they feel comfortable enough that they have evidence tying this back to Iran. Now, whether it goes to Ahmadinejad or the mullah, or whether it reflects some sort of disintegration of the Iranian regime and some sort of conflict between them, I don't think we know. But we shouldn't allow it to be a green light for the Israelis or for the U.S. The administration doesn't want to do it, is to somehow wage war suddenly on Iran.
Richard.
Well, John, the smoking gun is that money transfer that Eleanor mentioned, which apparently came from an account that was associated with Quds Force and that had been monitored before and that had transferred money for overseas operations before. So that apparently is why everyone believes this is the real deal. And it's not just Eric Holder, it's the FBI director at the Southern District of New York, it's the guys on the Hill, as we saw from Mike Rogers. So every intelligence service occasionally has sloppy operations. This would be a very sloppy operation. You wonder why they wouldn't have just plugged into their Hezbollah network here, but it seems to be real, and they may have just been responding to the fact that they assume that we or our allies have been killing their scientists on their own soil, and they just may not fear us very much anymore.
Maud?
See, I think they have a different interest and motivation, which is that they want to destroy or at least diminish the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, which is already very fragile. And were this to happen on American soil, it would certainly have a major effect on that relationship. And Saudi Arabia is Iran's principal sort of opponent within the Arab world. So in a sense, there's a motive there. I agree. It's also crazy when you see how it's done.
It doesn't make sense in this sense. If let's say they blow up the restaurant and they kill this ambassador, that would bring the Saudis and the United States together, because all of us would then say, look, they did this and we ought to just hammer them. Let's go for Natanz and these other places that we want to target, and Saudi Arabia would love that.
There'd also be a lot of people saying, oh, the Iranians would never do this, and look, it was a crazy youth salesman and the Mexican drug cartel. So the other argument for going this route is that would give you plausible deniability, and all the same voices that are doubting this was real would say the evidence is not firm enough to attack the poor Iranians.
We wouldn't catch the cartels blowing up a restaurant in Washington.
No, but you would say the same thing you're saying now.
The Saudis might blame America for not being able to protect their person. I guess that's the thinking there. But I think the Iranians now have to worry about retaliation from the Saudis, and I'm not talking about military retaliation. It's the oil wars over there. And the Saudis just have to ratchet up their oil production a little bit, and that will bleed Iran's economy.
Are we concluding that it's far-fetched?
Well, I mean, it is. There are several parts of it that are totally implausible. I mean,
now,
but there
is
are
there
parts
any
of
other
it,
reason?
The part that is for real is the transfer of $100,000.
Why did the Attorney General make a big deal out of it?
Well,
because
why?
It's a huge
because
deal.
it's a
he goes on television and he tells the American people.
If they were going to
leave that up to Obama?
Well, no, look, if they were going to do it, John, you're right. I mean, that would be an act of war right in downtown D.C. I just somehow... You know, this says this looks like a false flag operation to me. In some cases.
Why would he do it? Is there any other reason why the Attorney General would do it?
Well, look.
Did anything else happen to him?
Let me tell you something. If
it was another story.
If the United States attacked Iran, if Obama attacked Iran, I'll tell you, and it was close to the election, Obama would win the election.
Was there an embarrassing story, quasi-embarrassing story with regard to Fast and Furious?
It might be Fast
Can you speak to that?
It was very embarrassing. He was caught on Capitol Hill giving a false answer, whether he deliberately lied or not. It was a wrong answer about when he knew the program. But John, the idea that he would cook up this massive conspiracy to try to cover that up, Darrell Issa is not going to drop Fast and Furious no matter what.
Let's assume everything he said was true as far as the factual detail is concerned. Why does he go on television and tell that to the American people? He's unrolling another carpet.
Because it's a successful American national security mission carried out, and they want to take credit for it, and they should get credit.
Is that the reason?
We get off of Fast and Furious and we get on Iran.
What's Fast and Furious? Translate that again.
Fast and Furious is an insane program whereby our friends in the ATF, I guess it is, or they
alcoholic, tobacco, and drug administration.
Firearms, 2,000 weapons shipped into Mexico. We got all the serial numbers so we could then trace them when the cartels used them and get them for gun control.
How many guns are now loose in Mexico that are
they got a border patrol, an American border patrol guy was killed.
This mission went awry. The guns ended up in the wrong hands. But this kind of mission began under the Bush administration. This went awry, but the fact that the National Rifle Association is using it to go after the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms because they want the free flow of weapons across into Mexico. Oh, of course they do, and they're afraid this will be used to shut down assault weapons transfers.
Doubtless this is going to be around for a while. Exit question. Should the United States, with its allies, preemptively strike Iran's nuclear facilities? Yes or no? That doesn't mean a nuclear strike by us, just a total disablement of their nuclear capability.
Act of insanity to start another war in the Middle East against Iran over this thing.
Insanity, Eleanor, what do you say?
I agree. I'm with Pat on that.
Insanity.
Not in response to this, but eventually I believe we will have to do something like that to stop this criminal, bizarre.
Currently insane?
But not.
You can't. You wouldn't do it in response to this plot. But if you want to stop them from getting nuclear weapons, and I think we should redouble our seriousness in light of this kind of plot, eventually you're probably going to have to take military action.
You think they're redeemable?
No.
Beyond redemption.
Totally.
What do you think?
I agree. They're beyond redemption. And I also agree. This is not the occasion on which we should go in to Iran. We've got enough on our plate at this stage of the game with several other wars.
There is nothing in the international community or the domestic community that prevents a nation from developing civilian usage for nuclear energy, and you know that.
Yes.
We have loads of nuclear plants.
Yes.
They signed the
Why should they be deprived of it?
Because they're not developing it for nuclear.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
I don't think there's any question about that.
Mort, they got a nuclear reactor at Bushehr operating right now.
They what?
Russians. They got a nuclear reactor operating at Bushehr with Russian help, and the Russians
so
take...
what? They're
exactly.
making civilian electricity.
This is an energy-starved country
that just Russia being supplying them with a nuclear bomb? Yeah. Why would Russia want to do that?
They're going to take the stuff when it's processed and take it out themselves.
What's it called?
Plutonium.
Okay.
All right.
But that doesn't mean they're going to do it. Do we have any evidence of that?
The Russians are going to take...
Where's the evidence of their doing that?
There is no hard evidence right now that our intelligence agencies have that they're going all out for a nuclear weapon.
I'm not getting it. Why do we condemn Iran for developing nuclear power when it's all over every place practically?
Because we have real concerns over what they're going to do with their power. And there's a very legitimate reason to be concerned.
Have you lost sight of global warming? That used to be our theme song.
What produces global warming?
I welcome global warming. That's why
burning all these
south from Canada.
All these smokestacks. Nuclear is clean.
I know nuclear is clean, but not when it's used for military purposes.
Who says that Iran is definitely on that track? Are you listening to Netanyahu?
What does that have to do with it?
How do the Israelis think?
You go through the entire American intelligence community, they're going to give you the answer to that question. The answer is yes, they're developing for nuclear weapons.
Why don't they go public with it, Mort?
I would just point out that if Iran launched a nuclear weapon, they would be obliterated by Israel, if not us. And I don't know that they're totally unhinged.
The answer is as discussed. Pat, congratulations on the book, Suicide of a Superpower.
Thank you very much,
How's
John.
it selling?
Well, it's selling pretty well on Amazon.com, but it's not out yet, John. So
428 pages before you get to the great set of quotes you have.
35 pages
Pat,
of
it's
footnotes.
encyclopedic. It's more than your opinion. You've got positive and negative views of various these issues, liberal and conservative, and it all comes together. The footnoting is terrific. It's really an encyclopedic book. I want to read one paragraph. America is entering a time of troubles. The clashes of culture and creed are intensifying, and both parties are perceived to have failed the nation. Republicans were repudiated in 2006 and 2008, Democrats in 2010. And the crises that afflict us, here you list them: culture wars, race division, record deficits, unpayable debt, waves of immigration, legal and illegal, of peoples never before assimilated, gridlock in the capital, and possible defeat in war may prove too much for our democracy to cope with. They surely will if we do not act now. Got a question for you. What's the war we could possibly lose? Possible defeat.
I think when we come out of Afghanistan, it's probably, in my guess, we'll turn back over to the Taliban, and I think Iraq, where we're leaving, is moving toward Iran. I don't think either war was worth it, John.
I'm assigning this right now to the other members of this group to read. and to be able to report on.
I feel confident it represents the maturing of Pat's views, but not the mellowing.
Right. I detect a certain recalcitrance about
That's
reading it,
right.
John.
We are all anti-mellowing on this group.
Right.
We need Pat. Issue 2, Cain is able.
My top priority is 999.
It's working. Herman Cain is now the clear front runner for the Republican nomination to become U.S. president next year. Polls show that Cain leads Mitt Romney by 4 points and Rick Perry by 11 points. Cain's ascension is attributed to his 999 plan. He wants to replace the current tax code with all of its provisions and loopholes with a triple flat tax. 9% flat tax on corporations, a 9% flat tax on individuals, and a 9% flat sales tax on bought goods. Does this plan sound better than it is? Some reputable independent economists seem to think so. Robertson Williams, a senior fellow of the Tax Policy Center linked to the prestigious Urban Institute and the Brookings Institution, says this.
It will raise taxes on the poor. It will cut taxes on the rich.
So, this will directly affect the two groups. One, low-income earners. Under the 999 plan, 30 million low-income households would be forced to pay a 9% federal income tax when they currently do not pay any income tax. On top of this new income tax, low-income households would also have to pay the flat 9% sales tax on all bought goods. 2, high-income earners. 9% income tax is much lower than what richer households currently pay. 999 would dramatically cut taxes for the rich and heavily reduce income tax's role as a major revenue source for the federal government. So, is the 999 Cain formula a net plus? Cain says, in effect, that his critics overlook that 999 cancels out all these taxes.
The 999 plan replaces payroll tax, capital gains tax, corporate income tax, personal income tax, and the death tax.
By the way, Herman Cain, when he speaks about the death tax, he means, of course, the estate tax. Is the popularity of Cain's flat tax proposal a counter-reaction to Obama's soak the rich tax proposals? I don't mean to postulate anything negative about the president, but that's the way it's characterized.
Well, people like it because it's bold and it's simple, and there's this hugely entertaining and appealing politician out there in the person of Herman Cain talking about it all the time. I'm not sure people have focused on the details, and you really have to add up the nines. When it gets down to it, it's basically a 27% tax on wages.
What?
Look, let me just say something. The tax code is an abomination, and everybody knows it. It is replete with special benefits, special privilege, earmarks, what have you. We should widen the tax base and simplify the tax code. The Bowles-Simpson Commission suggested it. The Rivlin-Domenici Commission said it is the one thing that we can do now that would be revenue neutral and would stimulate the economy. He attaches to that, and he provokes that concern in the country. This program of his, frankly, doesn't work, but the simplification of the tax code and the broadening of the tax base really does.
We got time just to hold on for a minute. Why doesn't it work?
Why doesn't it work? For some of the reasons that are mentioned. The fact is, it is a huge increase on the poor and a huge deduction for the rich. That doesn't make any sense in this country.
He postulates and he says you're failing to take into consideration the taxes that are eliminated, which directly affect the poor. They benefit by those eliminations.
I'm not. Sure. I look through this. Without going into all the details, I don't share his views. Right. It's an oversimplification of what's happening.
Is there any
way? Absolutely increase taxes on the poor and decrease it for the rich.
Is there any way of retaining the 999 and, the country takes care of the poor? There's no question about that.
No,
Let's get that straight. The truly poor.
Sure.
And they get enormous I'm not fooling around with terms. We take care of the poor.
Sure, free education, free food, free medical care, and all these other things. Look, another thing, John, it would do, it would almost eliminate the IRS. It would eliminate accountants. The billions of hours everybody spends doing their tax
hours.
Right.
8 billion hours we spend
All right,
on
if
tax
you eliminate
returns.
that, if you eliminate and somehow you transfer some of that to assist those who are marginally poor, we got a poverty rate of 15% in the country.
That's right. 46 million people live below the poverty line in America.
How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel terrible, okay? It would not eliminate the poor.
All right, below the poverty line doesn't necessarily mean poor. Does it? It means below the poverty line.
Do you know what the poverty line is for a family of four?
What
it's $21,000 a year. That's poor.
For a family of four?
By any definition.
It is poor in today's society.
Absolutely.
Well, this sounds like an abomination to exist today.
It is an abomination.
And maybe we should be thankful for him for bringing about a possible reform of the total tax code.
I hope it gets Republican support and Democratic support for this kind of a simplification of the tax code.
His plan is simplification, but it would be a massive transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. It would layer a 9% national sales tax on top of the sales tax that people are already paying. It would eliminate the funding for Social Security and for Medicare.
Now, wait a minute. I think it eliminates the existing...
I'm with Michelle
You saw
Bachman.
the category of taxes that he's eliminating. He characterized those at the end to save his plan.
That's not
to save his... He cited those. In other words, give the plan some kind of a look again. Oh, Gad!
I have never seen in my life armored vehicles speeding to run over protesters as if they were competing for a prize.
Imad Gad is talking about a disturbing wave of violence in the Egyptian capital of Cairo. Egypt was the cradle of the Arab Spring, the wave of democracy in the Middle East. Today it is torn by violence between members of its 90% Egyptian Muslim population and members of its 9% Egyptian Christian population. 70 million Muslims, 7 million Christians. Those Christians are called Copts, C-O-P-T-S, or Coptic Christians. Radical Muslims have recently been attacking the Coptic Christians because the Copts do not practice the Muslim faith. Coptic Christians last weekend took their frustration to the streets as they protested the attacks by Muslims and the lack of protection by the Egyptian military, who now run the country since former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak stepped down. But the Coptic protests turned violent, and the Egyptian military drove through the crowd with armored vehicles, firing live rounds directly at protesters. The military claimed they were attacked by the protesters. The protesters claim that they were protesting peacefully and that the military started the violence. But 30 protesters were killed over 2 days. Almost all were Coptic Christians. But despite this, President Obama backed the Egyptian military government.
I really do have full confidence in the process that the Egyptian military is overseeing. I think they're making good progress.
Secretary Panetta visited Cairo last week.
What do you think of that, Pat? What do you have to say?
I think this is horrible, John. The Christians in that whole part of the world, all the way from Egypt over to Pakistan, are being purged and persecuted and driven out. In Iraq, half of the Christians were driven out in exile. They're killing them in their churches. And this is one thing about this spring, Egyptian spring, when you throw out the old tyranny, that unleashes a lot of forces, and not all those forces are benign. And anti-Christian attitudes are pervasive along the Muslim fundamentalists all through that region, and the Christians there who've been there since the time of Christ are paying the price.
Well, the Coptic Christians have had difficulties within Egypt for a long time. This is not new, and they were having a peaceful protest because there'd been arson in one of their churches. And what made the Arab Spring different in Egypt was that the military did not fire on their own people. This was largely a peaceful protest, and the military decided to take matters into their own hands. And I think that's a disturbing turn of events there, and I would blame the military for taking too much power than I would the clashes between the people. And they've done other things too. They want military tribunals for the citizens, and they are kind of reluctant now to begin to turn over their power. And I think there's nervousness that we may be going in Egypt from the Mubarak regime, of a repressive regime, to another kind of repressive regime by the military. They don't quite trust the democratic small d elements that have arisen.
What you're probably going to see is what happened in Iraq, which wasn't a government that was actively hostile or itself repressing Christians, but thus just let it happen naturally. And Pat's right, when you have the regime, the lid kind of comes off of all these hatreds, and I fear you're going to see the Christian community in Egypt, which is a huge part of Egypt. 8 million people suffer the fate of Christians in Iraq.
Muslims actually came to their aid in this clash. So,
I thought the military were running the situation.
They are running the situation at this point, and
She
our
seems
problem,
to be distinguishing between the military and the military.
Our problem, frankly, from the American point of view, and our national interest, is to make sure that something like the military remain in power rather than what the alternative is, which is the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists, which would be an unmitigated disaster for the United States. So it's not a comfortable alliance that we will have with them, but it is the best of a lot of lousy alternatives.
Do you approve of what the Secretary of Defense says about the way the Egyptians are handling this?
I do approve of the fact that we have to establish a bond with the military there as the best alternative in terms of our own interests, in terms of what I just said.
Is that what Obama's thinking is on this? Maintain at least some level of government, even though it is unpalatable. So the Secretary of State goes over, and Secretary of Defense goes over, Mr. Panetta, and he spends a day there. He comes back and says, we are in agreement with what they're doing.
Yes, I think, frankly, that makes sense from the United States national interest point of view.
They got an election coming. And the strongest force in that country, I believe, besides the military, is clearly the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't want to. Some of them don't want to move to power right now, but ultimately, that's the direction.
Is that what the Obama policy is? Keep these elections on track, no matter what you have to say.
I think they've got to do that because everybody in Egypt wants the elections, except for maybe the military.
Yeah, the military has been resisting, and I think the Obama administration wants them to go ahead. Also, I think Panetta probably made that statement before you had that clash with the Coptic Christians.
Will Mormonism be a major issue in the fall, yes or no?
If Romney wins the nomination, the Democrats will promote it.
An issue, not major.
The left will smear Mormonism if Romney's the nominee.
Yeah, I agree with Eleanor. It'll be an issue, but not a major issue.
It will not be a major issue whether he runs or does not run. Bye-bye.